All right, we are live. Welcome everyone to another Next Generation Social Ledger session. Today is February 6th, and we have Jim and Gary and Michael here, and wanted to take a look at a couple of things. Here's my agenda for today. Let me start sharing my screen here. Go back to the Mattermost channel. By the way, today, 1:30, there is the launch of the other project, right? SpaceX is launching their heavy-duty rocket today.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently with David Bowie soundtrack, and his payload is one of his electric cars that he's going to shoot into space. I don't know where it's going. I think it's directing towards Mars, right? And he has this spacesuit guy sitting inside the car, with his right hand out, left hand out the window, and he's drifting towards. I mean, how crazy is that? Anyway, so that's happening after our meeting today. So good timing.
Yeah, I can't. Is that what he's doing? He's going to land it on Mars? Use it to get around?
Hopefully it's going to pass by it with the next rocket with people in it, right? Anyway, so here's my agenda for today. I want to go over the CardStack thing, that thing that popped out of nowhere. And it's doing very similar things to what we did for a couple of years now, right? So they're ahead of the curve, and the learnings I got from last couple of days reviewing that are just tremendous. Love to see what they did there at CardStack. Then I want to introduce the concept of the Basecamp, the Social Ledger 2 Basecamp, what it is, why we're doing that. If we have time, look a little bit at the data structure, initial data structure for the Social Ledger. And it's not too complicated. You will see it's all JSON based, and as soon as you see it, you can make sense out of the different data pieces I want to capture in the first initial release, right? Then there's a Trello board I put together with a couple of the next big items we want to line up here and attach that to a sort of a timeline here, right? Okay, any questions, concerns? Should we go this way or other ways?
Good. Excellent.
Good.
Sounds
okay.
good.
There's something, me and Michael talked about this earlier, and I just wanted to review a couple of pieces here to show you how closely this CardStack thing is aligned with our thinking of providing a unified card-based interface towards different kinds of services. So his thinking comes from the notion of, well, we're all sitting in these silos here, right? So apps as silos, basically, right? You have a chat app, you have a transportation app, you have your wallet, you have your personal finance thing. Everything's sitting in silos. Everything has a different UI, right? So the whole notion of, what you have here on your mobile thingy is all siloed, right? You go from one app to another app, right? And he recognizes that that's something that doesn't make sense. It doesn't scale, and at some point, and it already happened in a way, right? So people actually are not going to the App Store anymore and download another app, right? They're just reducing, their input to like 4, 5, 6 apps on their phone max, right? And that's the stuff you're interacting with. And the other 100,000 apps that are out there, who cares, right? Very few people actually are looking at that stuff. But he recognized, well, there are these silos, right? Let me move forward here. And these silos are also charging money, right? So you actually have to pay per user, per usage rates for each of these silos, right? Is that a good thing? No, not in his opinion. So he's introducing, and then same thing. That's an interesting slide too here. Same thing is happening now with the cryptocurrencies. There's another way of creating silos, drawing people into, a silo for storage services, a silo for identity services, a service for trading services, with their own cryptocurrencies for each of these silos. So you want to play in that? Well, you have to use that kind of currency. So he continues that theme on the silos into the cryptocurrency world, which I found interesting. And then his vision is now, of course, breaking down the silos and looking at this from a horizontal layer, right? And the way he's doing that is by putting this horizontal interface on top of that. So let me see if I can scroll forward here. Here, what he calls the CardStack. So an experience layer for the decentralized internet. So all of this stuff is still happening underneath the surface, right? There are these centralized services, but there's a card layer on top. And that to me comes very close to the notion of the next generation social ledger, which says, here, let me pause this here. But this was pretty close, where we tap into local services, we tap into blockchain services and cloud services. And what we do is we provide these cards here, right? So let's say there's a sales or purchase order card down here. And this purchase order cards reaches out via API calls to these cloud services, or if they have, I mean, that's a little bit looking out in the future here, they have blockchain services, which is out to that too, right? So the card represents, a bunch of features, functions, data points out of the cloud services and out of the blockchain services, right? And the user, so this is the interesting part, the user only interacts with these cards. There's nothing else. They have no, I mean, they could go directly into the cloud services, of course, but then they are back into, well, there's different interfaces, different way of looking at the data, right? Not a unified way as it is in that card here. So that becomes the main interface into all kinds of things, messaging, payment, arbitration services, legal services, all kinds of things that are happening out there, bundled into a single unified interface or experience, as he calls it. So that's interesting. Let me show you another part, 318. 318. So this is kind of the high-level architecture there, where at the bottom is some infrastructure components, and he is deeply into Git and GitHub, and Node.js and Ledger stuff. So Ethereum is a big piece in his vision. So he builds everything on Hyperledger and Ethereum to build these smart contracting thingies on top of that. And already see some criticism, of course, coming up, because that stuff, as we know, is hard to scale, and it might get very expensive to do that. But nevertheless, so that's his infrastructure layer, and then there's a hub set in the middle here where you have these components, which are the cards, basically. Let me move a little bit forward, which he breaks down into here different kinds of cards, right? Around narrative creation, around discovery, around conversation, around workflow and membership, search. There are lots more here that are entering this kind of hub here, where you can pull together these cards and create new cards. So his thinking is very much into sort of an ecosystemic thinking of, well, it's not only they build the platform, but you want other users, other developers to go in there and create their own cards, right? Their own API integrations, which very much aligns with what I want to do with the social ledger, is to say, we're not only building these cards ourselves, we want others to create more of these integrations and bring other ideas, other protocols, other pieces of content into that social ledger picture, right? So that resonates well. There's another piece resonated pretty well. Let me see, 414. That's kind of a conceptual idea of the framework. I'm not sure how far they actually went now to implement that. The demos I've seen, not so convincing. It's all very nicely designed, but still very limited. So you see here is the different components for a DApp-based infrastructure, where you have different pieces of business logic bedded into these different cards. So creating a whole sort of card catalog and what he calls a cohesive user experience is CUE is the name for that. So there's a really deep integration with these different backend services, and to my mind, a bit too much of an integration. I was talking to Michael earlier. I don't know if you recall, Jim or Gary. There was a wave, beginning of 2000, where enterprises build portals, portals like ATG, like BA WebLogic, like IBM portals, where they wanted to bring everything into a single dashboard. It's like the ultimate vision was you can control your entire enterprise from a single place. And there was a lot of effort. I was involved in that too when I was working in the HR consulting company. They wanted these portals, right? And say, I don't want to work with these stupid backend systems like Oracle or like ERP systems anymore. Give me everything in that portal and make that highly functional, right? So I don't have to worry about this stuff anymore. And I mean, millions and millions of dollars were spent into creating these portlets, these little functional units that control the entire backend service. And interestingly, that vision is completely gone. Doesn't exist anymore today, because the complexities of maintaining such, integration and bringing, squeezing all of the functionality into these little, portlets here was just too much. I believe, that at some point it was just abandoned and say this is not feasible anymore. And instead, the backend systems did some revamping, and suddenly you see more, friendly UIs. Like Salesforce.com came and said, let's revamp the whole ERP experience and put a friendly UI on that, and so people interact directly with Salesforce again, not through these portals that these vendors had built. But the idea was there. So the idea was really to say, hey, put everything in one place, like this version here, right? To say, create this cohesive user experience, right? No matter what it is, you put it on a single map. It's all transparent. It's all organized in a way that makes sense to the end user, and build it. But I'm worried, don't go too far with this and say bring all of the functionality in there, right? That's not the purpose. What I want to do with the social ledger is to pull some of the metadata that sits in the backend systems. Let's say like in Mattermost, right? Pull it out of Mattermost, put it into a card, and show that in the context of the space you're working in, right? And then once you have that metadata in place, then you can start to manipulate it in some ways, little ways. That makes sense. Not recreating Mattermost in social ledger, that would be way, too much, too deep of an integration. But saying little pieces here that are useful will bring that into the card. So let's say you want to change, a simple example I mentioned Michael earlier. You want to change the title of the channel. Well, you can the title shows up on the card, right, in social ledger. You could edit that card and say, change the title. And it would update Mattermost through the API and change the title of the channel in Mattermost, right? Or vice versa, you can go into Mattermost, make a change to the title there of the channel, and that updates the card, right? So a bidirectional integration of changes, either on the social ledger interface or directly in the tool you're using in the backend, right? So these little changes I see, that's a feasible thing as long as the API allows that, right? But not going overboard and bringing this whole thing into the card. That just recreating the functionality, and I don't think that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so that's the architecture. I want to show you a very interesting thing here. This one here.
I just have a couple comments. You still basically need a directory of all the services you use. I mean, the portals, we're trying to largely, have one size fits all. Although you could customize the portals yourself, it wasn't something that people generally did. But you still need that global view of all the spaces you're in and services you use. So, you know, the idea of the dashboard lives. I mean, it lives at a different level, maybe. But, you know, there's still like your dashboard in Zapier and your, you know, the landing page you come into in GitHub. And I just want to mention that list. And the other thing is, you know, I don't see, I see the, you know, the tremendous parallel here in terms of building the exposing the functionality of all your different tools and spaces in sort of like a skeleton. But what I haven't seen is the structure of that skeleton. I mean, the main thing of the social ledger is activities within teams, within domains, within organizations, and among organizations, which I think is, you know, the key relevancy of the social ledger, in my view, is that structure.
Yes, and let's come to that when I want to dive into, you know, what's Basecamp and what's the data structure and what's the infrastructure behind that, right? So that's an important point for today. I want to go back to the integration a bit more, because his vision was, if you look at this 2x2 here that he created, not quite agreeing with the names of the axis here. You know, to the top it's openness, to the bottom it's fair reward, to the right it's market growth, and to the left it's user power. So he has these four areas here. One is driven by the big players, right? The centralized companies like Facebook, which is ad supporting platforms. So he calls this, you know, towards market growth and towards openness. That's the wrong word for me. But okay, let's say this is one of the big players, right? So obviously social media space. And on the lower left, he has Apple as proprietary cloud services. So kind of recreating, moving away from the web and creating their own little walled gardens. I like the comment he had about Steve Jobs, which he said, Steve really hated the web. He hated the messiness of the web, and he wanted to have something that's beautiful, that's nicely designed, right? And people don't need to break out of his environment anymore, just live happily ever after in his garden, right? And he did that, and that's what Apple does today, right? And you live in the Apple Store, in the app environment. I mean, he coined the term app really as being something that's on your mobile phone, right? The idea of that's where you live, where you work, right? But it's all, you know, these walled gardens here. And interestingly, with CardStack here, their initial, if you go back to 2014, when they ran the first, showed the first versions of their tool, they went to these two spaces. They wanted to embed these cards within browser interfaces within, let's say, Facebook, and show the functionality within the context of their own environment. So deeply commercial integration, or same with the Apple side, inside apps running on your mobile phone. And he went, as Michael taught me earlier, 90 degrees from that model into the open source community space and the crypto token economy space. Completely basically abandoned these two squares. He said, I give up on those. I don't know what the reasons are for that, but I don't see it anymore in his new vision there. And going after the open source community and going after the crypto token economy. So that's something, you know, the crypto token stuff obviously wasn't there in 2014. And open source was there, but it wasn't as organized as it is today in GitHub, and everybody basically that's the standard for putting your source code and maintaining it. So his new vision is now going after those guys and say, hey, there's already a huge, gigantic organized community, and you know who's there, and you know how much work and effort they put into that. You see all the branches, and he looks at the tree-like structures that's open, that's public, that's for everybody there to grab and make sense of. and says, okay, why don't we take these pieces of data, right, that's already there, and look at the open source community as a way to connect those over to this new thing that now happened, called the crypto token economy, right? So basically, I think his vision is, that's my interpretation of that. His vision is he wants to connect the open source community to the crypto token economy and create a really big reward schema to say, why don't we market this space and say, this is going to be the end user interface into services, right? Obviously, the direct interface into the open source community is very complex. People, can't install this service on their own, but they could do something like the CardStack user interface, right? So they could go through that, use the service, but pay for the service, right? So what he does, and one of the interesting components is he's using this contributor accounting model that I also put into our presentation there, where you actually calculate the percentage of contributions, based on the tree structure that you have in the open source community. How much, how many branches are there, how much time and effort they put into there, how many code pieces they updated. All of this data basically is there. So he wants to mine that data and then attach it to a new crypto economy that says, great, we know the contribution levels, right? We know Jim was an active contributor, 50% for this project. If somebody buys that service for the project he created, he gets this 50% minus some fee, whatever, and is rewarded for that. So he brings really, and that you can see that in the next slide. So he merges these two together into a single thing, forgetting about the commercial aspect, solely focused on the open source world now. Say that's the thing in the middle, the CardStack that's now controlling. And I'm using the word controlling here, really, right? So, because he wants to become a big player in organizing the open source community, moving them into more of a thinking of, hey, they have services, why don't we sell the services and make a lot of money out of this through these cryptocurrency economy markets, right? So that to me, I think, is the next big vision thing he's trying to figure out, and he uses Ethereum for this, right, as the smart contract and blockchain underneath the crypto world. And he's figured out, if you look at this vision here, not this one here, is another one. You can see how far they went already, and creating a whole process and way to a reward system. Here, this one. Look at this. So a detailed token mechanism for rewarding all of the work that's coming out of the open source community, and giving money back to everyone who's involved there. So that is kind of the big picture of what I think he is going, right? And I'm not so comfortable with that vision, to be honest. I can see they've tried a lot of things. If you look at one more thing I wanted to share here before we move on. There's a timeline. Let me see what that is. 5:15. No, somewhere later. Here you go. This is the roadmap they're putting together, and that's current from the website. So that looks at 2017. Oh, there's one that's earlier. Which one did we see before? Whoa, maybe they just updated it. Between Michael, we just talked about it, right? And here's one that starts in 2017. There was another one I've seen before, which was in 2014, right? Wow, has that changed? I don't know. Anyway, so things are moving fast here. Right? Anyway, so 2017 as he calls it Git as truth. So this is where the truth resides, right? This is where we have all the developers sitting there contributing, and we know they did the contributions, right? So this is an honest picture of the world. Why don't we take that, put a CardStack interface on top of it, right? That's also open source, and then use that as a way to create some income streams for that kind of world, right? And all of these cards, they started with here the content management thing in the very early days, 2014, which is the Drupal integration into their system, towards workflow systems, contextual messaging systems, membership stuff, billing stuff, all of the different kinds of cards that you could imagine are part of their world now, that he's using to attract an external audience, right? So end users, to buy into that, to use the economy that's created there, sort of the ecosystem that he has in mind, and reward everyone in this picture, right? So this is where they're going with this. So it's really a big picture, big vision for where he wants to take that. But for me, I'm not comfortable, because if you look at the open source community, for example, they're not into making money, right? And commercial thinking and selling the services. They're not. They're in there for the passion of developing new projects and putting code out there for others to share, right? So that sharing piece is really important. Not so much of rewarding everything they do. So for me, it's just sort of force fit into a model that says, let's take all of the data, we mine it, and connect that to a gigantic financial ledger to reward these people and make money out of this. I'm not so comfortable with that vision, right? Where he's taking that. But it is impressive, and I looked at the stuff they've been looking at. This is a lot of the same tracks we've been through in terms of what kind of framework, what kind of infrastructure, what kind of interface. That's really cool. And to see that, how that evolved, the thinking, how that evolved over the years is quite interesting to see.
I think it's a great model. I think it's more in tune with my vision of the gifting economy, where people just do what they do. They participate in open source and they get rewarded. I like that. I think that's fair. If we want to be fair, we should reward people for their effort, even if they don't ask for it. They produce value. And thinking will change. People will stop thinking about how I can make money and think more about how I can create value. Because they know Big Brother's going to come back and reward them if they create value. So it's all good. I guess the thing that, I already mentioned that, it doesn't embody the social structure at all. I think that's a major deficiency in the plan there. And the other thing is what's unique about GitHub? We force everybody in the world to use GitHub for everything? It's ridiculous. Sure, GitHub is one channel of value creation, and our solution should be generalized for any value creation social network.
Yes, I agree. I see GitHub as a very special case of digital life. And I think GitHub and the open source community really is already working. To come into something that's already working and try to monetize it is kind of risky. I think I would rather look at broader solutions that figure out ways to create communities that are cohesive, and they can grow and create value and you know, improve the quality of people's lives. And I don't think those particular problems have solutions yet. And I think it's much better to monetize something that doesn't have a solution than one that seems to be working very well.
Great, love it, Gary. Yeah, Jim, you had something else?
Well, I just wanted to say that, you know, any system for creating value has to have economic scalability. Okay, we have to stop thinking about it being business so much as it having economic scalability so that it's self-sustaining. And, you know, I mean, one of the big problems with Big Life is almost everybody has to have a full-time job. They can't, you know, contribute. You know, I mean, what we're accomplishing is minimal compared to what we could be accomplishing if the people who cared about tech we trust and the world we want were free to participate in it, you know, and would be sustained economically, at least. And I'm not against people getting rewarded. You know, I'm not against rich people. I'm not against people getting rewarded a lot. It doesn't take anything away from the other people, because it's not a zero-sum game. It's not a finite system. It's a system where if we're producing value, we're creating more equity all the time. It's getting, you know, and we're all going up. And those of us that are super performers may go up faster, but we want to reward those people that are super performers.
So I totally agree with you, Jim, on the reward side. You know, what Gray just mentioned on, you know, the other more darker side of rewards, which is a monetization of this, right? That's the thing that rubs me the wrong way, right? Because you're introducing a vector here of force that can't be good for the open source community, right? Then suddenly it's about, whoa, your application made so much money, you got so many bitcoins for that, well, let me make sure my application is better than your application. You introduce sort of a competitive mindset into this mix that is not currently present in the open source community. They're not at all. They're really thinking your lines, Jim, where this is, well, there's a big enough pie for all of us, right? And this is more of an abundant world where you can create knowledge to no end. There's limitless possibilities versus this narrow focused world of let's find, you know, buyers of the service, right, and then monetize that, and then create an income stream strong enough to actually support. I mean, it's not saying it's wrong to, you know, they have their families and they need support, and we know they don't have enough income streams, and they'll probably all have second jobs or primary jobs and doing that on the side. But it introduced a force into that I'm not so comfortable with. And the other thing, Gary, you mentioned is interesting too. So the notion of community building here is front and center of the social ledger, right? We're looking at collectives here. We're looking at groups of people improving their worldview, improving their life, improving their way of working together, building, co-creating things, right? That's I think, a different perspective than CardStack has with looking at individuals, you know. So this is my dashboard, this is how I perform and become better by using these services for myself, right? What I don't see in his presentations is really this this view of you're not in there on your own. There's other people. By the way, you have a team there, you have to work together, and you're actually co-creating this stuff, right? So that kind of field, energy field I want to create among, you know, teams of people, reaching out to other teams of people, that's so much at the core of the social ledger, right? Not the isolated view of that's me here and I want to improve myself here. That gets us, again, on a different track that don't want to be in here. It's tapping into all of these different groups of people that are out there that are already organized and that want to start sharing their knowledge with other groups of people, right? That kind of thinking here. I don't see that in his picture there. But anyway, so that's CardStack. We should keep tracking that and see how much he's actually monetizing it. Maybe he's not, but I do think that's a strong component of his vision.
Yeah, and one more thought that I had when I saw it is, he's got a vision of I think what a lot of us have, and a sense of what's possible. But it sounds like he's committed to a particular solution working, and I'm not quite so sure that I want to either commit to his solution, but more than that, I'm not quite so sure that I'm not so sure that I agree with his vision, but I'm not sure what my own vision is for what's possible yet. So I think we still need to be coming up with I disagree with him, but I like the fact that he has a vision. And I think we need to be looking for a vision that's more accessible,
Yeah.
more relatable.
I agree with him, but like I said, it's just one dimension of in the ecosystem that our cards will play in. Okay, that there's no reason why we should not be compatible with his card system. His card should work in our system. That mechanism for rewarding on GitHub is something that we could use for our chain even. But it's not a whole, it's only one one value that is being tokenized. Participation on GitHub. Okay. I mean, we do more things in our lives than participate in GitHub. But yes, participation in GitHub is part of what we do. And we should give people credit for what they do on GitHub. So yes, do it, but it's not.
It's not enough, right? That's exactly right, Jim. I love that. That's a great point. Good. So what are we doing then? So let me go back to my screen sharing. Back to Gary's notion of, well, let's put our vision out there and see what we're actually doing. So let's go back to our deck that we currently have. And I wanted to show you a new section here, which I call Part 5, Immersive Experiences. So that lies basically at the intersection of a lot of my work in the couple of past years. I've done work at change agents worldwide, where we go into organizations and help them change the way of working, right? I've created seniors where I run online virtual real expeditions, like creating stories in small teams, visualizing those stories, immersing yourself into the story through all kinds of cues. And digital life, right, which looks at technology we can trust. What are the pieces out there that we find beneficial to your team, to your group, to get going and to co-create something on your own, right? So that to me is like at the intersection of my last couple of years coming together here into the social ledger. And one of the pieces here we haven't talked about much is the immersive experience. And for this, I'm pulling up here a new metaphor, which is called the base camp. So base camp is sort of, that's actually a real place at Mount Everest in Nepal, where trekkers go to meet and rest and get adjusted to the altitude. And then they go on treks up the mountain, up to Mount Everest. And I love that metaphor a lot. I've used it at seniors in knowledge expeditions. So I took teams up in Mount Everest over a couple of days or a week, where they go from camp 1, camp 2, camp 3, and then something happens in between: avalanche, an ice cave, a Yeti attack. So little stories, right? That brought teams closer together. Getting to know them better. And writing these journals on the way that were pretty fascinating. So I want to take bits and pieces of that and say, can we bring this into the social ledger? And one of the big things for the social ledger is you create a space, right? You create a context for where you are and where you work in. And one of these spaces here is, in this picture, is Basecamp. So Basecamp is going to be home base here. We can invite people to say, hey, who's currently here? Let's have a chat. Let's go visit some tents if you want to. That could be tents for giving some background on the social ledger, right? So what have we written in the past? What have we done in the past? There could be other tents that help you gear up. If you want to become a developer of the social ledger project, well, here's a tent to get you familiar with the tools we're using, right? So tools like what kind of software framework are we using? What kind of editors we find good to work with? What's the language we're using? So tents that get you onboarded pretty quickly to say, hey, yeah, that's cool. Let me understand that and get on these expeditions. And then from Basecamp, the idea is, once you're here and you're familiar with the bigger picture, you can then go on these expeditions up the mountain. And that could go then to, say, a camp 1 that is now deeper into project development. This is into, let's say, a version 1 development space, where this is the sole focus here is on creating new software, testing the software and figuring out the features and seeing if it makes sense for the end user. So it's at a higher level, more focused on the release of another version. And then it could go to another camp, even higher, right? Camp 2, let's say, that is now focused on the next release of the social ledger, right? So this whole thing becomes an experience, an expedition in itself, right? So your work becomes the expedition. That's kind of my thought that I had a couple of weeks ago, is to say, why don't I merge these two spaces? The experience, of being in some space with the actual work you're doing in that space, right? It's one and the same thing if you can merge that together. And that's the idea of Basecamp here, to say, hey, there is a space, there's a context here, right? We have that in the social ledger already, right? The current context is, while you work in the channel, like the social ledger lab is a channel, right? And it's a space and it's a context for doing social ledger work, right? But I want to expand that and put that into a much more interesting, more, experiential, more, we call it virtual real. Is one of the terms we coined for seniors. So virtual real means it's both virtual and it's real. And you make it real by sort of you being there, following the metaphor, right? So showing up at Basecamp, walking into these tents, getting to know people who are showing up there, and so almost like physically walking around there and getting acquainted with the scenery and the different locations. That makes you feel at home and be present in that space. And then you can launch these other expeditions from that space. So that's my metaphor that I like to use, that's the root one, the first one, the very initial one, to get the self-booting process where we actually use the social ledger to create the social ledger thing, right? So you're there, you visit it, you see what's happening. There's a board somewhere where you can see the progress and the next milestones and so forth. And you leave it, right? But if you're there, you can also utilize some of the real-time communication features. You see these two avatars here, for example. You could see who's actually currently online, who's present. You can click on an avatar and say, hey, there's Jim present. Let me have a quick conversation, a peer-to-peer chat with Jim and seeing what are we doing today, or what's the issue, what have you heard recently, right? Or a text chat here too, right? So a quick real-time check-in conversation with anybody who's there, including visitors, right? So you can also have visitors, inviting them to the Basecamp space and say, hey, let's give you a quick tour. Where are we? What's the social ledger? Where are we taking this? Are you interested in developing this stuff, right? So having a real-time conversation there with people and giving them access to certain pieces of it. And then you see this big plus button here on the lower right. So this is kind of the way of instantiating new spaces. To me, as the very initial function of the social ledger too, is an easy way to instantiate these spaces, right? And by that I mean, let's say we start walking from here towards Camp 1. What does that mean? As simple as you click on the plus button, up comes a form that says, okay, what's your next destination? Camp 1? Okay, describe Camp 1 for me. Well, you have a picture for Camp 1. You have maybe some background sound effects for Camp 1. It's heavily snowing up there, right? And you have a description of the space, right? And you hit submit and you create it. So then what happens, you see another card like this that basically opens or gets you into the next space, right? Into that Camp 1 space with new context, right? So you enter that space through the card, and you are now in Camp 1, and it's a different context, meaning this is where work for version 1, let's get, is being done. And there are different maybe tool sets we're using, different issues we're working on. The whole context changes from base camp to Camp 1. And then you continue the journey, right? To me, this is like this tree here. You see that thing on the right side, this fractal thing? If you put base camp at the center here, right? So this could be the originating point, and from there, teams could branch into all kinds of directions, right? All kinds of expeditions. I don't want to limit that to Basecamp only, but of course, there are other teams who would go in there and say, we'll create our own online experiences in our own spaces where we're comfortable with, We're going into the desert, right? We're going into, where's that thing? Yeah, we're going to China, to the Crescent Lake oasis, right? And that's our base camp. And then we want to make that comfortable and invite people over to this kind of space. That's the context we're operating from. And that's fine, right? And it's not even developer or software development related, right? So it's a space that they can talk about, like the S7 guys, talk about new spheres and where they're going to take their vision next. Or Identity Girl talking about, new ways of creating thinking around who you are on the internet. All of this stuff is possible, but just by creating your own space. That's kind of step one here. Create your space. That's it. And then invite people into that space. And what that also means, of course, you want to know who is in that space. So the avatars that are popping up here, so you need to be authenticated. So there is an authentication mechanism running in the background that allows you to log in and create an identity. And then from that point on, you can also say who can enter that space, right? So there's some groups, I can see this already with the communities that we're tapping into, they're rather private, right? They don't want to share everything with the rest of the world, or at least they want to know who's in their space. So it's possible, right? Just like in Mattermost, we can create an invitation-only space. We can do the same here on this side and invite them into the invitation-only base camp or oasis space that they create. But we give them the freedom to say, hey, you can branch out in any directions, right? So if you have one kind of main path you follow, there's one goal, one mission, one vision that all of these teams have, we want to encourage them building this path, right? And that goes deep into the idea of the social ledger. What is the stuff that we can help them put, on the way, kind of the roped path, the tools, the protocols, the things that they might use to push their vision forward, right? Stuff that other people on different tracks have used in the past, right? Things that have worked for them, maybe that works for these new teams here that are going on their own mission, right? On their own expedition. Let's help them move forward. And they will have branches, right? So there are other sections of their trail where they create separate spaces for, resource work or research stuff that they want to explore before they go back on the main track and push their mission forward. So this could be a huge picture of all of these different places that they create, freely inside the social ledger environment. And we don't even know about what these spaces are. Some of them are public, some of them are, private or in between. But the main notion of launching these expeditions, putting people on these trails, is to me a very interesting one, attractive one too. I've seen that with seniors, to bring people into these kind of narrowly focused, highly immersive zones has a tremendous effect on the team spirit and also on your personal development. I've seen things in seniors and running these knowledge expeditions that are just incredible. Things where you can really up your mind and get into this flow state of things, right? I should really take you on a knowledge expedition. So that stuff is still running. So we should go on a knowledge expedition here, and I can show you how that actually works and how it affects you while being present there. But that's just a side effect to me. If you can bring some of these aspects into social ledger, it would be fantastic, right? So amplifying sort of your mind, coming into the zone here, and becoming highly focused while doing your development work. That's such a beautiful merger of things and activities and actions that can happen in this space that I think it's worthwhile to develop further. Anyway, I'll stop here for a second. See what you think. Questions, concerns?
I like the adventure expeditions topic. I guess what was confusing me is, everybody's goal to climb Mount Everest. I mean, is that do they come into this space having any goals? That was one question that came up in my mind.
Okay, great question. Let me stop here for a second because that's an important question, Jim. Basecamp is for me the launch space for Social Ledger 2. Okay, anybody who is interested in Social Ledger would go through Basecamp. This is not the base for any other collectives already on board, right? So the guys who are doing the Noosphere stuff, they have a different space, right? They have nothing to do with Basecamp. They can visit us, right, because we probably have an open space, and they can even send a developer in there and say, hey, they are going on a journey, and we want to help them building Social Ledger 2 or 3 or 4, right? So let's send them on the track, and they would go through this experience, right? So they would be part of this expedition that I'm creating here. It's the sort of the root expedition of the whole thing, right? But as you mentioned, Jim, we have other expeditions with nothing to do with, and we don't know what they're creating, right? Like the Oasis thingy, going into totally different tracks, nothing to do with software development. And our platform would support that too. That's my point here. You can create all kinds of spaces in all kinds of vectors that whatever you want to go with, direction you want to go.
So I see you say you're talking about creating these metaphors for people who share things, goals possibly. In our case, our goal is to build a Social Ledger 2. So we come up with this metaphor of a base camp where people can where we could gather, where team members could gather in some sense. I like this idea because I'm in need of some metaphor to describe the social ledger. And I feel like this is sort of addressing a problem that I haven't quite found a solution to yet. And one thing you mentioned was that different people, individuals could have their own base camps and invite others to it.
Right.
So are we talking about coming up with some sort of structure that allows us to different groups to build their metaphor on top of it, and then the individuals similarly build their own personal base camp, and that these individual base camps somehow link to this more community idea of a base camp?
They're all communities, Gary. So whatever teams we're coming on board here, they create their own base camp. By base camp, I mean, it doesn't have to be literally the Mount Everest base camp, right? It could be their, forest, some beautiful, mountain area with trees.
Right, a bird watching expedition.
That's right. Tree houses as meeting spaces, right? Their own metaphor of going on their own little journeys, right? And they can do this. So, but you said something very important, and Jim, you said that earlier too, which is we provide the structure for this. Okay, so we are here to say, hey, there are these spaces, and you can create a space. By clicking on this plus button, we need to know where you're coming from. So we still have the universal structure of there's a collective on a high level. There's this thing of here. Where is it? Here. Your entry point. There's this thing called organization, right? So you come from some kind of an organization, right? And your first step is to create that thing in our world, right? So this create button would then say, that could be the plus sign that says, okay, name your world. Give us your metaphor for that world, or choose one of these 10 metaphors if you like, and make your space, right? And then suddenly, let's say our chain has a space now. That's their base camp, right? And from our chain, from that space, now you go into the different activities you do in the base camp. Just like today, you can jump into the conversation channel, use your chat tool like MetaMost, and begin your conversation there. And we make sure there's a card now on this interface here. If I go back to this, there's another card popping up, right? It says, okay, you're in Basecamp. There's also this conversation card next to it, right? And that's pointing you to this same channel where you have a conversation going on in MetaMost, just like today, right? But we provide that structural piece. That to me is so important, because without that structure, people get lost very easily, right? If you don't have a space to go and you don't know what are the different tools you can use here, it's hard to figure out, navigate your way around, right? And to know even what to do, right? We want to provide that kind of structure to say, here's the basic first steps, create your space, create your 4 or 5, I have a set of cards here that I think is the initial card sets you want to use, and then go get started with it, right? I just have to stop here. Just someone at the door here. Be right back. Hold on.
Gone quiet all of a sudden.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, other thoughts on this?
Go right ahead. I'm all in favor.
Okay, let's put our backpacks on, get our gear ready, move on to the next stage here.
I did have a comment. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
My thinking of this deals with, like I have about 4 people to onboard to the social ledger as a result of the open space. And, I'm thinking about this expedition thing along with the open space idea and the glass bead game idea, and thinking of a toolbox of these ideas that the social ledger is somewhat agnostic about. What the kinds of spaces where expeditions is a kind of space where along with open space and the bead game and whatever. But I was thinking of having of bringing people into the Lab Dig Life channel in the social ledger trial, and this is a base camp. And I'm thinking along the idea of the S7 user story. Step 1 is the lounge. People, come into the space. They settle in and share. They call it synchrony, a synchrony space.
Can you pull up that slide there, Jim? Because I think that's an important one for us to consider too. Oh, let me stop sharing my screen.
They have their 7 S's, and I have to look them up because I don't remember what they are.
Oh, that's what it stands for. Oh, right.
This user story sort of resonated a bit, and I think it applies to the onboarding issue, and sort of like from the lounge to the self-locator, it's like what spaces might you join? Discovering the spaces, being guided, facilitated into the spaces where you belong. It's like steps before we get to base camp.
Yeah, let me say, this is one particular journey here, right? So they are on a journey already, right? We don't want to take that away or change their journey, right? But instead, what the social ledger can do is totally support their journey, right? And by that, I mean, see, where it says first step is like the lounge. Well, that's the space, right? So what they could create is a space called the lounge, right? Where everybody who enters the S7 space is going into, right? And that lounge has sort of the basic facility for you to orient yourself, for you to understand what they are after, and to go into the conversation spaces they're using, right? Go into their documentation stuff they're putting together, see how, scheduling stuff for their Zoom sessions. So this kind of thing there's already a structure in there that we can readily support in the social ledger, right? And they even have, that's fascinating, there's an arrival thing at the end where, well, here we go, they have a destination they want to go, right? So there is a goal that's embedded in this synergistic circle here, that we could readily support by they launching their own little journey, expeditions, whatever it is. And what the social ledger does is, for each of these steps here, sort of they provide some guidance, right? So some ways of supporting what I mean by self-locator, right? So locate yourself. So they probably have some protocols, some maybe even some tool sets or activities they do together, right? To find this, right? To say, here are ways to see who you are in terms of the S7 initiative. Great. Well, that could be different cards, different activities we could also support here. And by the way, they can now take their stuff that they learned and created and share that with other spaces, right? So people who are going up into the Oasis might have use of some of these self-locator thingies that they're putting together, or the Synergy Space Simulator. That's another interesting one. So they're already thinking so much along this. How do you work together, co-create this stuff, right? And again, the social ledger is just the skeleton, the scaffolding around that, right? So the structural piece that you can easily put together without getting lost in these endless conversations that they have. Recently I was in a conversation with Identity Girl on why don't we use Slack, and then I had to explain them what MetaMost is and where they're going with this. They're so lost in these spaces, right? If you give them a little bit of a structure here and the creative freedom to say, hey, that's your own thing you want to do, I think that would go really far to draw in a lot of people with a lot of ideas and a lot of spaces eventually. Does that make sense?
Yes. I guess I'm trying to design my expedition for onboarding people to the trial. Just start throw these things around.
Totally. Yeah, that's right. We can have an expedition just for showing the social ledger, right? So showing off some pieces, some cards, and you can go take them. They can actually go there and you can invite them directly into that space, and together with you exploring that space, they can explore it on their own. Totally possible. You'll see that this is endless combinations of this kind of stuff.
Endless combinations.
That's a word you want to see applied, right? I could see that. Okay. Let me switch back here because I wanted to show you one more thing here, because now I'm at a stage where I want to launch this journey, right? I want to launch our expedition here and climb up that mountain, right? And I want to create Basecamp for the social ledger too, and see, okay, what basic building pieces do we need to get in place to open up Basecamp, right? For us, for developers who are interested in this, people who want to support us, and visitors, right, who just want to go there and see what this is all about. And so this is what I came up with. So my basic list of to-do things that we should work through. And it starts with the obvious, right? So there's the web framework, there's the UI framework, and there's a template framework to get started on developing this stuff, right? There's a server configuration, something is set up locally on your own machine, or we have a server up and running that contains and hosts all of this stuff. We have different environments, right? Testing, deploying this stuff, versioning this stuff, monitoring performance on this stuff, right? Then CloudRun is a big piece in this. I see, the whole app management for the initial set of cards with the initial set of functions, I think are provided by whatever we pull out of CloudRun. There's an OAuth piece, the identity management to make sure that you are identified and you can log into this space. There's some documentation features, because we do need to document the journey, and make sure other people can read and follow and see what we've developed so far and how they can make use of that stuff. And there's some gear too, right? So going back to the expedition metaphor, you take your backpack, your map, your compass, and you can join. You can climb with us on this mountain there. We welcome everybody, right? It's an open space. It's not restricted. We don't charge any fees for that. We want to invite as many people as possible. So that's on the sort of the configuration side. And I had this similar slide earlier with configuration 1, right? So configuration 1 to me becomes now Basecamp. That's synonymous for Basecamp. And on the functionality, I want to see, set of cards here, staying with the card-based metaphor, which is, there's an identity card, so see who you are. There's an avatar showing up, and different roles too. I can see there's a Sherpa role and there's a trekker role. So Sherpas, more people who will guide other people up the mountain. Trekkers who are more visitors, part-timers, people who want to join the journey for a while. Then there's when I say portal card, so that's the scenario I just stepped you through, right? So I click on the plus button and you create a new space that's deeper into the story, right? So story is really the main elements here. I was taking over from the knowledge expeditions. So you deepen your story. You go to the next thing in your story that happens, and for that you create spaces that are going deeper and deeper into this. And you have a card showing up, right? So there's a card that someone created and says, okay, I want to create the next step in this journey, right? So here's the portal, here's the entry gateway, right? So portal here as a means of a door, right? So a doorway into the next space, not the dashboard thingy, but the doorway into this. That's the meaning of portal card. And then there are other, more utility cards, like how to create a journal, so sharing our knowledge information in text-based content, be that a Google Doc or some better ways to share that kind of content. The chat card to jump into the conversation space, be that MetaMost or something else that they prefer to use. The link card, to me, also important, which to me is Wallaback at this point. So the bookmarking tool, where we can do any links, any resources, any research we're doing. We could go through a Wallaback integration and have people collect links that way, organize links, and then have a way to share that within the team. And the video card, of course, to launch these kind of Zoom sessions here or other kinds of sessions. And a presence card, so knowing who's there, engaging into one-on-one video chat, and using by location ID I mean figuring out where everyone is, so you could maybe working on Camp 1, and you can see that Gary's up Camp 1 doing some stuff here today. I'm at base camp showing visitors around there, so you could actually see that just by hovering over their presence thingy. Say, okay, Gary's online, Gary's at Camp 1. I can jump there and have a conversation with Gary if I want to. So that's kind of the basic set of things that I see happening at base camp before we even go to Camp 1, right? So Camp 1 being sort of the next, maybe the initial release of that thing, where we have something that we can open up to a broader audience, going from alpha to beta version, whatever that step is that's required at Camp 1. And then, but that's not the end of the journey, right? So it'll continue, right? So there's going to be Camp 2 eventually, hopefully, and Camp 3. Actually, on Everest, I think 4 camps before you can reach the summit. And by the way, with seniors, we never reached the summit. We haven't accomplished that yet, because every time we do that, something is happening on the way. People get drawn in too much the story. We had situations where people freak out and we couldn't continue anymore. We had situations where we don't know what to do from there, or it got too intense. Different reasons. But the story really stopped every time. I think Camp 3 was the highest we got. And then we had to return back to base camp and then back into what we call the village. So from base camp, it goes back to the village where you came from, right? And then you tell your friends and family, whoa, what happened this morning? Well, last night I went up Everest, to Camp 3. It's always a good story to share with your friends and family. Right? But so that's for me now to say, shall we get started with setting up our own infrastructure, right? So the first environments where we can start developing, we can start testing, we can start inviting some people to showing stuff. So that's the question for you, for Jim too, especially because you are our master of setting up these environments here. What's your thinking along these lines here?
Well, first, let me comment on I guess a concern that I have is that I see this as a highly branching structure of of different trails that lead to the top of the mountain, and I guess a little concerned about linearizing the but I think we can and certain things like we're not building new stuff. We're you might be building new stuff, but most of us are going to be integrating things that are out there, things that we're using, and they have their own frameworks that they use. And I think we need to, flesh out the web and UI framework that we're leaning toward, and consider I guess get people like Rao and Gurinder to buy into the technology. Something that I would like to attempt.
Right. That's great, Jim. That's a segue into the next part I wanted to talk about. What I put together on Trello. On your first point, though, when you say you're worried about people branching out into all kinds of directions from Basecamp, what I see happening here is sort of there's a group of what I call Sherpas here who are resident at Basecamp. That's basically the 4, the 5, the 6 of us here, right? So we are Sherpas at Basecamp, and we would set up these expeditions for others to come or come not. They can create their own spaces, of course. They can create their own oasis thingy or forest treehouse thingy. Welcome to do so. But I think we sort of maintain the main development track of, say, that's the social ledger. Here is the path 1, 2, 3. We maintain that. And it's open source and people could grab it and do their own thing. That's right, of course, anytime. But we would maintain this expedition here, right? So you want to come on this expedition and see where our vision takes us. That's scheduled from here, starting from here. That's my thinking on avoiding this whole notion of branching out and going on different expeditions, building the same thing, right? I don't want to see a social ledger competing to another social ledger thingy. Doesn't make any sense to me. Right?
Yeah, it's all about interoperating. I'm just saying.
Right, and of course, there's immediately some tension if you bring other developers on board. They come with their own notion of, well, that's my UI and my web framework that I'm using. You guys are not using that? Whoa, no. Not sure if I can help you in the development. I can see that, of course. That's why let's talk about the next thingy here, which is here's my.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking more of the back end of this whole thing, which is the bot ecosystem, which is architecture neutral. What the APIs are implemented in doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah. Bots of course play a big role here. But let's talk about this here first, because I do want to get into the sort of base camp and what the equipment we need to set this up. You know, the kind of tents we need to set this up. And for this, I've created this Trello board here. And by the way, this is Trello because right now we don't have anything running on our own server. There's no Kanban thingy because there's open source out there that does the exact same thing. But for now, it's just Trello, so temporary. See, as a temporary space.
We did set up a CAN board. We didn't get the OAuth working, but we did set up a CAN board on WDAP.
That's good.
Now, in terms of the infrastructure here, I mean, are we going to basically use the co-cloud DiviDAO structure, or is DigLife going to do something?
I don't think DigLife is going to do anything, Jim. The resources we have there and Moon is pretty much restricted to keeping the lights on.
We are co-cloud, which is sort of a DiviDAO related effort, which is our cooperative cloud. Okay. You're in charge, Jim.
See, okay, yeah, let's talk about who's in charge of what a little later. Yeah, let me step you through this stuff here first. So one column here is talking about the server environment, right? And if CoCloud already has all of this stuff, then so be it. That's great. And by server environment, is obviously we need to create and maintain our own servers on something like DigitalOcean, right? So opening up a new droplet, opening up a new server configuration, and then running some of the apps here, right? So the development stuff running on top of it, as well as the Cloud Run stuff running on top of this. So these are all steps here in the server environment. Very basic, very fundamental, and stuff that you've probably already been doing, Jim. Same with version control, so how do we put that into a GitHub repository? What's our deployment process? So any new changes in the code base, how do we push it out there to make that live as soon as possible? And I want to keep that process really as easy as pushing a button and then the code is live, right? An interpretive language that doesn't have to be compiled, and we can just replace codes that's sitting on the server, and it's a refresh of this, or not even refreshing. If we use Meteor as a web framework, that it's not even necessary. But figuring out, what the deployment process is and the way we want to use the identity management, the authentication piece. And I don't have much behind this. This is just a list of labels here that I see falling under the server environment. But then more interestingly, I'm putting more effort into the dev environment now. How is that going to look like? And for that, as you know, I've been looking at different web frameworks for the last couple of weeks. And the one that really stands out for me is, let me open this here, is this candidate here called Meteor. And to me, this is a very, very promising architecture. It's simple enough to find your way into. It's not a steep learning curve, right? And
I like that.
Yes, I can show you, Michael. You'll become a star developer. And the thing is with Meteor is it's very agnostic to not only the front end but also the back end. So I've never seen a platform that's so agnostic to anything that's coming down the line. And by that I mean agnostic to front end. You can use Angular, you can use React, you can use Blaze, sort of their own little template front end. It doesn't matter, they don't care. And it's agnostic to the back end. They're currently using the MongoDB thingy, right? But what's happening with this other thing called Apollo, which is their GraphQL stuff, is fascinating to me. If you look at what's happening there in the API integration space and how to sort of buffer, input coming from any API there, from any application, right, into into their environment and then use it just like MongoDB does, where that's a NoSQL database running on the server, but there's also an instance, they call it mini Mongo, I think, running on the front end. So in your client, you have an instance of this Mongo database backend, and that's what the client is using. That's what you use in the browser to create your interface. It's a very elegant architecture, and the way these two databases synchronize, right, or replicate, is all happening in the background. Me as a developer, I have nothing to do with this, right? I'm just worried about my data fields, pulling it out of the front-end Mongo database, and update my interface, refresh my CardStack there. That's all. And all of the replication is happening in the background, and the access is happening in the background. So that to me is really an interesting portion of Meteor, and where they're taking it with Apollo and GraphQL, right? So GraphQL to me as a better way to subscribe to these API calls, right? To subscribe to these services, whatever we're using here. Because, I mean, ideally, just think about that. There's a new service coming online, and they have a complex API. And if there's a fairly standardized way of reaching into that complex API through a GraphQL query, that would be fantastic. I mean, that would take out a lot of the development work that we'd have to do in actually, binding this and running code for the API integrations. So a lot with Meteor to me is I want to take the burden off a lot of fundamental tasks. I don't want to rebuild this every time. There's a framework in place here that is already utilizing a lot of this stuff. A lot of knowledge and experience went into building that thing, and they're still improving it, at a very rapid pace. What I see happening on the releases, the work with Apollo that they're doing there, and what they're doing on these conferences is really interesting. And fast too. I was reading this article. There's a critical article about Meteor I posted from, I think, 2 years ago. And that person who reviewed it said, great framework, but sort of has some limitations. Here are the 10 limitations I really hate at using Meteor. And if you see what's then following in the last couple of, in the last 2 years, is they're almost taking care of all of these concerns. You can see that each of these things are sort of taken off the list, and they are becoming available or have been resolved in certain ways through the next releases of the Meteor framework. So very promising platform, and I'll stop here talking about Meteor because to me it's still a candidate. Obviously, there are other candidates out there, but I do see it's a promising thing that I'd like to try. Here's the strategy piece here at the bottom, where I'm thinking, we could start with a Meteor. The pub/sub pattern is the Mongo database they're using now. So that's writing everything to Mongo and then retrieving everything from Mongo and then putting it up in your template. It's the exact same pattern as we have with Firebase now. Because now I'm writing everything to Firebase, which is a NoSQL database, and pulling that stuff out of Firebase. What's interesting here, assuming Mongo is good enough, and they've used this for large-scale implementation, so I trust this is good enough database. We don't even use Google services at that point anymore. They're out of the picture, from day one, because I can write the data to Mongo. It's the same thing as writing it to Firebase. There's really no difference. So that would take care of that. We could start with, they call it the Blaze template engine, which is simple, one of the many template engines that are out there. And it's easy to learn. It has the basic functionality that we need. See, at this point, I don't want to go overboard and learn Angular or look into React, Facebook stuff. These are gigantic frameworks to me. They have way too many features and functions that we would never utilize in something like the social ledger. I mean, I shouldn't say never, but at this point, the simple stuff we're creating, these cards and these integrations and these data streams coming in and out of cards, that's all doable with the basic framework and basic template engine, right? And then I see us, if we go that path, that we can do this kind of a migration towards more GraphQL subscriptions. So you could go away from the Meteor PubSub thing towards a GraphQL subscription model. If, I'm saying that's stable and more usable. Because right now it's fairly new and there's not much documentation out there. So there are not many cases we could look into to say, hey, similar code base, let's replicate some of this. And similar to Angular or React, if, let's say, Blaze is becoming too limiting, we need more features, more functions, well, great, then just switch to another front-end framework like Angular or React down the road. Don't see that as a problem. But to me, so the whole box of take Meteor and then be agnostic towards the front end and the back end, to me is very appealing. So for me, a way to get started quickly enough and putting out stuff for others to share and to look at, fairly quickly.
I think it looks like you've done your homework pretty well here, Joachim. Certainly has a good, seems to address our requirements pretty well. I have to look into Blaze some more. I would shy away from Angular. I sort of toward React. So, like I said, I need to look into Blaze more closely.
Yeah, that's great, Jim. Yeah, take a look at Blaze. It's very similar. The syntax is similar, right? So it's easy to learn, and I think the feature set is rich enough for us to understand how to develop this, and it's so elegant. If you go and look at the Meteor JavaScript code, it's so beautiful. I mean, it's so elegant to say, hey, there's a front end piece in your JavaScript file. There's a back end piece on your. Now I'm talking to the server, right? Which is talking to the database, which pulls in the fields, which I can use on the front end. It's really easy to read. There's nothing complex using any big Ajax. If you've done Ajax integrations before, they get really wieldy and hard to follow the code lines. Here they took out all of the complexity and just left the basic thing in this object-oriented way. It's beautiful to read. I encourage you to read some of the Meteor samples. The typical one is the to-do thingy. Create your own to-do list. You can see how simple that framework is and how elegant it is. Okay, that's this stuff. Then there's also the UI piece. And let's jump over. There are a couple of other development environment thingies here, but I want to jump over to this column and also to this and go to the specs here. So specs to me is like what do we want to see realized in the first version. So one big piece, of course, is the identity. Be able to log into the system and register as a new user in the system, right? So that's a classic login and register function as a type, who you are you human or are you a bot? I want to make this distinction and make it clear that if bots are part of our thing, right, well, they have to be declared, and they are just like a user visible in the system, right? And they have certain rights in the system that they can access. And that needs to be really declared and fits, I think, nicely into our notion of, well, it's just another identity, right? It's a bot in this case, and it has certain access to endpoints in that case, right? Then the authentication, and now, Jim, you have ideas on who do you authenticate against. You're saying probably Mattermost is one good provider. I'm thinking also Cloud Run is a good provider. I don't know yet, but I think we want to have a provider that's kind of a little bit outside of the applications we're going to use, the application services we're going to use in the social ledger. So sort of a neutral stance there. What can be the most neutral provider here? I don't know yet.
We're looking at standing up a glue server. The issue is, managing it. Again, do we have people to manage it? That's an industrial strength identity provider that supports UMA standards, and it sort of glues together things. It supports shibboleth, 25 million educational accounts, and SAML for corporate accounts. So we could really support the bring your own identity part of it, where you, in essence, aggregate your identities, your GitHub identity, your Mattermost identity, your Trello identity, in a Zapier kind of way, where you can, actuate your, where you can easily
Nice ringtone. Yeah, Jim, what's it called again? Glue what?
GLUU.
TLUU.
G as in Gary.
Right. You guys get far too esoteric for me. Besides, being on this call now for 2.5 hours, I can't quite hold it. And I believe there's a space expedition about to hit the sky.
Oh my God! Shoot!
Yes, right. So I'm out of here, gentlemen. Lovely stuff. This is fantastic. Let's keep it rolling. See you guys later, right?
Awesome.
Yep.
Oh, hey, Jim, nice things happening on Subutai. We'll talk about it later. Okay.
Yeah, that's the other consideration is how soon, can we put this on Subutai, and it makes sense. It makes sense to start on Cloudron and work our way into Subutai.
Yeah. Subutai is an unknown quantity. It's very thin ice until we've checked it out a little bit, but I'll check it out. If it holds me up, it'll be all right. Okay. Bye.
Okay. See you later, Michael.
Thanks. Lovely stuff.
Thank you.
When the card interacts with an application, it has to use the user's permissions. That's the key thing. Okay, it can only do what the user's allowed to do. Okay.
Right.
So it has to know their account in that domain. And if they can use, in essence, what we'll be providing is an open ID for the user, which is self-sovereign in the sense that we let the user control it. It's not self-sovereign in the sense that they're running their own server unless we run an HID of one for everybody or something like that, solid, which will be an option for a self-sovereign user to use a solid IDP or an HID of one IDP or a community provider like Glue or like Mattermost even. Thing is that, the functionality, IDP functionality of Mattermost is really a desert. It doesn't, it has a lot of other APIs that make up for it, but it's not a standard IDP, if you know what I mean. It doesn't maintain the, you go in to your member settings, and that's all the functionality you have. You can't give your brother permission to control your thermostat. Whatever. Right. So it's exciting. I'm a little bit disappointed that we're going down the Trello road.
No, we're not, Jim. This is just temporary. I want to get this out of Trello as soon as possible.
So if we can get the OAuth working in the Canboard, we're golden.
Yeah, that's right.
Or we could just use the Canboard and worry about the OAuth later. Just maintain accounts on Canboard.
Yeah, that's possible too, man. And then, once you're comfortable with the idea of using something like Meteor as the web framework, right? So I want to get that started two, you probably need then, you have to set up an application stack that supports Meteor, right? And they have Node.js, and they have MongoDB, and their front end, the Blaze thing, right? So it's a stack that we'd have to install on wherever you want to run it. I leave that entirely up to you, Jim.
Yeah, I think we'll have 2 virtual machines, one for Cloud Run and one for Node. And then we have a shared host that we can use for PHP or whatever else we want to run.
Yes, right. I'm thinking ideally there's no more PHP in this picture, because now you have server-based architecture too, and you can run this without PHP, right? You can process server-side commands.
Yeah.
But that's a different discussion. We can have that later, right? So I just wanted to get out the basic framework.
I'm saying that we're mostly calling services, and a lot of those services we're going to create, and we don't care whether those services are PHP or they're Rust. I really want to move toward Rust. What I'm looking at as the user interface right now is the the wallet.parity.io. This runs contracts in the browser, and it's a tailorable interface. It's like cards, but it's the kind of thing people need to have in order to work with Ethereum. It's open source. It runs in the browser, and it uses WebAssembly, so that it's got a code base in. It'll run contracts in the browser, but right now that uses WebAssembly, which is only on Firefox. Of course, there's a JavaScript version of it, but it's very slow. I just thought I would mention that, and I will be encouraging people to use Rust where they can. I guess about as much as I can say about that. But it should, they should interoperate. A person should be able to work in whatever language they want. And, of course, we have to provide the frameworks where they can plug in easily and get done what they want. But certainly the current architecture is that you've chosen looks like it's a go, and so we'll set up. We'll set up 2 machines on DigitalOcean, and put Cloud Run on one, and do the other. Now, this next week, and then the Arching Governance Conference is going to certainly limit my time to dig into this and set up environments but I don't doubt I'm going to get much further than that.
I think that's good enough, Jim. If you set up these two environments, there's a lot of steps I can go through, to actually get familiar with that. I will download. There's also something I can run on my Windows machine here. The same thing, as on a Unix box. So I can experiment with this a lot, and then trying to keep these two repositories in sync a bit. The files, to see what the progress is for quite a while until we get into other tasks.
Now we have a GitLab set up where of keeping the social ledger one stuff. It's a pig. And if we get a lot of people involved in the development, we may not want to use GitLab. We may want to use GitHub. We may want to have a mirror on GitHub for our own use, like GitLab for our own use. But for general people working on it, we probably want GitHub. We use a free account. It's all public code, which is what we want anyway. It just gives us certain security issues that we have to be careful of when we we just have certain ignore files that we don't put on GitHub that have our secrets in it.
I see. That sounds good. Yeah. Sounds like a plan, gentlemen. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Joachim, Jim. I learned a lot. I've got a lot more to learn if I'm going to be able to help much with this project.
Yeah, there's so many dimensions to that, Gary, so I wouldn't worry about it. Programming this stuff is just one dimension out of many right now. So plenty of stuff to do and think through. Great. Thanks, gentlemen. Thanks, Jim. See you.
Yeah.
I'll post it later on